Hello, this is part two of putting it all together for Sanger Unified School District. A couple years ago, we decided as we were looking at our system that we had three great silos, but that those silos were not at all cohesive or working together. We had Universal Design for Learning living by itself, we had our PLCs living by themselves, and then we had our Guaranteed and Viable Curriculum, which we were working through in some of our PLCs, but we had not meshed them all together. We didn't know how they all fit. So this is one graphic that kind of shows how we in Sanger think that those three things fit together. The glasses that these people are wearing are the lens, or is the lens with which they are using to provide access for all by removing barriers for all of our students. And that's our universal design for learning. The team itself is a professional learning community, so they're collaborative teams that are working together to analyze data and answer the four critical questions of the PLC. What do we want all students to know? How do we know that they've learned it? And then what do we do when they do learn it? What do they do when they don't learn it? And what it is that we're working on is our guaranteed and viable curriculum, the specific standards of focus in our lesson design, and what those standards mean, what the non-negotiables of those standards are, and how we can teach those standards. So again, that's how we took the three silos of PLCs, UDL, and GVC and saw how they were meshing together to fit our system. So what is guaranteed and viable curriculum? First of all, this is from DeFore and Marzano, but what guaranteed and viable curriculum is basically the promise to the community, the staff, and the students that this is the content, regardless of what teacher or what classroom that student is assigned. And then the viable is that making sure that we have enough time to teach those things. And why we needed to focus on it was so that there was coherence across the district for all of our new teachers. If teachers changed grade levels and were unfamiliar with that new grade level content, if students change school mid-year to make sure that one teacher or one classroom had already covered one topic and that same student would be learning about the same topic in a different classroom because our pacing was off, and to allow for resources and support for our support staff. We wanted to make sure that all students had equitable access to the same emphasis of standards, and most importantly for our teachers, a balance of time. If we were to take all of the standards in fourth grade and give them the same amount of time for each standard, not only is that not appropriate considering the rigor of some of the standards, but we would never be able to pace out the year and complete that curriculum. So we in Sanger tiered the standards. We looked at all of the different standards at a grade level for our content areas, and we said that these are the enduring standards, the medium or the need to know standards, and then the worth being familiar with. And those terms were what we picked based on some of the work from, again, the DeFores. So the enduring standards are the high leverage standards that are essential for student learning. They're introduced early on and worked throughout the year. There's strong attention given on assessment, and if we're going to be doing reteaching, those are what we're focusing on. And typically for each math and ELA, there are about 8 to 10 enduring standards. The need to know standards are the more medium leverage. They're important for understanding and they're spiraled throughout and are present on formative assessments, but they might not take as much time in the pacing calendar. And then there's the worth being familiar standards. We're not saying they're not important. They're lower leverage. They're not as heavily present on pacing or assessments. And sometimes it can be an isolated one and done lesson, or they can be embedded. A lot of our technology standards, for example, in writing are embedded within the writing standards that are of a greater endurance. How we actually did that, in fact, I'll find it later. Um, but then we're talking through, okay, so that's what, and then the GVI is how. So if the GVC is what to teach, then the GVI, the guaranteed and viable instruction, is how to teach it. And this is our kind of placemat. Our goal is creating expert learners with intentionally designed instruction using the lens of universal design for learning. So we have our UDL brains up at the top: engagement, representation, and action and expression. The entire thing is focused on the learning target. What is the target? And that target should be GVC connected to a standard. We have the learning environment, which again shows the whole thing. And that's like how the environment, whether it's a physical classroom or a virtual space, how that environment allows for mistakes. It allows for students to be open and have growth. And then the different maybe parts of a lesson that do not have to flow in this way, but there is a lesson opening. We create connections to previous lessons or to real life experiences. There's some sort of instruction of a main concept. There's formative assessment throughout the lesson, and then there needs to be some sort of closure and reflection. And again, all of this is connected to the learning target. This is a more detailed look at it. So I'm just going to shush and allow you some time. You can pause the video. We do, though, want to point out that there's a lot of different methods or models of instruction. So guaranteed and viable instruction does not say you have to do it in any specific way. What we are saying, though, is that we have to start with that learning target, that it is GVC connected to a standard and that the rigor is appropriate. You then think through and look at the lens of UDL guidelines to help unlock barriers. And then you have the different elements of the guaranteed and viable curriculum: your environment, your lesson opening, creating connections, the concept instruction, formative assessment, and closure and reflection, to then look at all the different type of instructional models, regardless of the different types of instruction that you're doing, whether it's a PBL, a whole project, whether it's direct instruction, whether it's a 5E lesson, or you're doing a launch, explore, summarize in math, a designated ELD lesson, whatever the case may be, all of these pieces can fit into them. We're not saying at all that you have to follow in this thing. It's not a linear path. You might have a science lesson that you don't do an opening, that your opening is just a phenomenon, and you're not going to say, today we're learning about blank. You're going to open with the phenomenon and then come back in the closure to say, okay, what is our learning about this? So don't think that you have to follow this in a specific path. They're not, again, a linear model. It is just that those pieces have to come into play in some way in your lesson. We're also not saying that they have to be every day, because a lesson we know can span the scope of some days. However, we do want there to be some sort of closure and reflection to each different part. Like, for example, if I'm a science teacher and I see my students every other day, I need to have some closure, even and especially if I haven't reached the goal, because I want them to have some time for metacognition, for self-assessment, for reflection over, okay, what do I need to do the next time? So how do we put it all together? We have our effective instruction elements that have been in the district for years. We have the GVC of what to teach, the UDL that we're going to push past the myth of the average and teach the margins, and we have teacher voice. We want our teachers to be professionals. They have autonomy. They have their own style. We want to put it all together in ways that make sense to them. I encourage you to check out the Sanger Learns website, which is here at sangerlearns.com. And it has more information. And if you scroll down, there's actually PDFs of the GVI elements. And that is all. That is part 2 of putting it all together. So thank you so much. Have a great day.